sports fans, and welcome to the Tampa Bay Community Network Sports Talk. I'm your host, Coach Chuck White, and my guest is Mr. Bob Henriquez, former coach of Tampa Catholic and Jefferson High Schools, and he's currently serving as the property appraiser of Hillsborough County. And because he spent 27 years in coaching, I'll be referring to him as Coach Henriquez, because once a coach, always a coach. But first of all, let me just say, Coach Henriquez, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Coach White. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and I look forward to our chat today.
Yes, and it's always having people of your caliber on our show, especially since you've been doing so well in the field of athletics and in the political field. Mm-hmm. So I would say I'm sure my viewers and listeners are going to get much from this show, and they're going to enjoy it immensely well. So let's start from the beginning of, shall I say, your illustrious sports career. Okay. First of all, I know you had to come up as a player, and many times players start at the early age when they're doing sandlot football, basketball in the streets, mm-hmm. in the playgrounds, in the schoolyard. Tell me something about the first sport that you got attached to, and how did that come about and where?
Well, I'm blessed in that, I grew up in a time when, your parents could let you out of the house in the morning after you had breakfast and not call you to come back until lunch or sometimes the evening, and you'd cover it in dirt from whatever sport you'd been playing. But, we played football in the streets, touch football. We played baseball in somebody's backyard, sometimes even tackle football in somebody's front yard. It wasn't the safest thing, but probably depending on the season, it was usually football or baseball, to be honest with you. And sometimes we'd go down to the park and play some basketball as well.
Boy, those were the days. It takes me back to memories when my mother used to call me in, and I'd be a block or so away from where my boundaries were.
Just come to the front door and scream, call your name, and you'd come running.
And the guy would say, CJ, your mother calling, and I would get back down there.
Well, the whole neighborhood was watching out for you. So.
Well, can you remember some of the guys that you came up with playing during these little times of enjoyment of sports?
Yeah, I mean, as far as my childhood, I had, my good friend Jerry and Larry, they lived next door. We went to different schools and what have you. If you remember in those days, at Christmas, everybody would seem to get their favorite player's uniform. They get Hutch, I think it was Hutch used to make these. Of course, they were supposed to be for non-contact. Immediately, we'd put a helmet on, and I was Bart Starr, and somebody else was Sonny Jurgensen, and somebody was Johnny Unitas, and we'd go hit each other. We were till this day are friends. But probably what I remember the most growing up was, having gone to Catholic school, was the CYAA, the Catholic Youth Leagues. Mm-hmm. We would play different sports, soccer, basketball, and what have you, softball. And a lot of the kids that I grew up with, and back then, most of the kids went on to do TC or Jesuit if you were in the Catholic Youth Leagues. And we had guys like Rich Monteleone who went on to have a great career with the Yankees baseball career, went to Tampa Catholic. Of course, he was a giant. Even back then, in 7th grade, he was already 6'2" and what have you. So some of those guys, I remember that guy was a big guy named Sultan Fuss. There were a bunch of those guys that went on to be star players in their own right in different sports in high school and college, or even on the pros.
Were you born or reared up in Tampa, or where were?
Yeah, I'm 5th generation. I go way back. Mm-hmm. My great-grandfather was the last mayor of West Tampa before it became part of the city of Tampa in 1925. The Henriquez family actually homesteaded on Rocky Point before the Courtney Campbell Causeway existed, way back during the Depression. And my grandfather on my mother's side was born in Spain but immigrated here as a very young man and was a reader in the cigar factories, lector, and both my grandmothers worked in, all the families back then worked in the cigar factories. So yeah, my roots are pretty deep in this town.
Tampa, Cigar City, Florida. That's so many cigar factories was in West Tampa. Mm-hmm. And Ebo City, as many people come here from out of town, they thought they should pronounce it as Weibo.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah, well, those were the good days, and I can remember when it was segregation, but yet we could go to West Tampa and play against most of the Spanish guys, and over in Nebo City, and I learned a little something like Tita Buca. Well, anyway, those were great days, and the police came. I remember Rick Casares and those guys used to be out there, and every Sunday Rick would bring his group down to Trailer Park. Do you remember the old Trailer Park?
That's a little bit before my time, but I've certainly heard the stories. My father was a little bit before Rick Casares, but of course my father went to the old Jefferson, so he was quite a legend, and went on to play for the Chicago Bears. But those were the times. You know, I kid people that I'm a product of a mixed marriage because my mother was from Ybor City and my father was from West Tampa. And if you're a native, you understand what that meant because there was a rivalry between the two. It was kind of a big deal. So, but you're right. It was a different kind of community. There was, you know, it was segregated, but there was a certain, you know, it was a community in which folks still got together. Particularly, I think, in some ways because African American community and the Hispanic community were both sort of looked down upon in some ways or treated differently. So they somehow had some commonalities. And a lot of them worked in the same kinds of jobs, and whether it be cigar factories or in different jobs that they grew up together. So I think Tampa was way ahead of the game in terms of understanding race relations and the importance of that before some other cities may have been.
I'm going to throw a couple of names at you and see how you remember Cookie Garcia and Augie Garcia.
Oh gosh, those guys are legends. You know, the Garcia family. I've never quite figured out if we're related, although it seems like everybody's a cousin in Tampa. But certainly, you know, those folks, and they're both in the community and then in the political world. You know, we had power brokers back then. We had people that knew everybody, and there were certain people you had to know if you were in that arena. My cousin Lou Delapart was a state senator. And like I said, my great-grandfather was the last mayor of West Tampa. So I had sort of this understanding of the political world, was fascinated with it, but really it was more about public service for those guys. At the same time I grew up, my father was a house painter, and I came, as you knew him, very, very humble beginnings. And so for me, it's always been about service, and that's where coaching and my political career parallel each other, because really it's about community, about giving service and giving back.
Well, those were the great days, and parents was really parents. And it's no comparison now because sometimes the civil laws won't allow you to say or do things to make sure those kids understand what you mean.
Right.
And the same thing in coaching. We did a few things then that they're not allowed to even think about doing now. But when you got out of the sandlot football, you had to start off in a youth sports group. What were some of those youth sports groups that you played in? Well,
largely I played in connection with I went to Catholic grade school, so I played largely in with the Catholic youth leagues, you know, CYA, and they were very organized and they were good. So we didn't have football. Now, when we moved to California briefly when I was small, and we had flag football there. And that was very organized, and I actually played up. I played as a fifth grader. I played on the 7th and 8th grade teams on the flag football team and in basketball as well. So those are the memories of my first organized, you know, in terms of athletics. I didn't play Little League baseball or anything like that, but that was the first. And then, unfortunately, I was too big to play, you know, because of the weight limits to play in you know, it's like the Tampa, you know, TBYFL now, but any of the youth leagues and that. I would have had to play up in age, and my parents didn't want me to, you know, move up. It just probably wasn't the smartest thing, you know, physically. I would have gotten beaten up a little bit. So I didn't really play tackle football, till I got to high school at Tampa Catholic.
Well, what about junior high? You know, they call it middle school now, but during our days back then, at least my days, I know, we call it junior high. Was there football or baseball?
Well, because I went to Catholic school, we went up to 8th grade, and then Tampa Catholic started in 9th grade, as did Jesuit. So we went straight to, the way it is now, we went straight from elementary school to high school. And it changed, of course, after the fact. Now, one of the things that junior high was good for us at Tampa Catholic back in the day is that we could get 9th graders. That was a lot of our players would want to play in high school, but they couldn't yet. They would have had to play junior high football. And even after junior high football was done away with, our and we didn't have middle school football here, a lot of the parents wanted to send their kids to Tampa Catholic or Jesuit so they could start in 9th grade. So it was actually a good thing for us because we were able to get some of our best players and start them earlier in 9th grade before it changed the way it is now, and players go to high school in 9th grade.
Well, after 9th grade, were you on any varsity teams at the 10th grade on?
Yeah, I was on varsity as a 9th grader at TC.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I was probably not ready for all of that, but yeah, and so yeah, I really never played the JV, and of course I ran track or threw shot put and discus as well. I wrestled for a little while, 1 year. That was an interesting experience. Very different sport as well, and but I was fortunate at Tampa Catholic to be able to play early. Of course, back then, there was a lot of players that played both ways. There's still some of that, but I mean, we had smaller units. If you were a big lineman, for the most part, you played on both sides of the line. I was talking to somebody the other day how it would seem like the only thing I wasn't on was the kickoff team. So we'd be on offense and get stopped, which we get stopped a lot, and then I'd long snap for the punter. I was actually the backup punter, but I couldn't snap to myself, even though I could punt better than punter. And then wait for the defense to come on the field and do our defensive stand, and then hopefully come off maybe for the punt, and then go right back on. So very fond memories.
I'm listening to you as you say the offense came off the field and the defense came on in your high school days.
Right.
In my high school days, you had to go both ways.
Right.
I was an end. I always wanted to be a quarterback because when I came up through the Sandlot, I always played quarterback. And most of the time I look around now, those guys, the best players, they always put there to get the ball and throw it or do whatever. But if you played football, you stayed on that field until you got hurt, tired. Your scores would run up so high they want the guys to substitute or give you a rest or whatever have you. Now, you're getting into the point now where you were a big boy growing up then. Now you must have had some coaches to remember.
Oh yeah, absolutely. My first high school coach was a gentleman named Wayne Granda. He's very well known. Wayne is one of the most intense people. In fact, I saw him not too long ago. He's still very intense. I mean, he's intense. He can he could be ordering a cheeseburger at McDonald's and be intense about it. But very tough guy. Then really the coach, one of the ones I think about most fondly was Coach Dave Grantham, who coached at Robinson High School in Tampa Catholic.
Yes.
A couple of years went back to Robinson. And we still talk from time to time. And at Tampa Catholic, unfortunately, we had quite a bit of turnover, and head coaches. But then I had Coach Dick Voris, who had coached for years. He coached with Earl Red Blake at Army. He coached he coached in the Cardinals. He coached with the Packers and Vince Lombardi. He coached with the Bucks in their inaugural years, and decided that he wanted, before he retired, to come back and coach high school football again. And one of his assistants was Earl Lane, who's very well known around here. Ended up coaching with USF and LSU, and I think he's still coaching someplace now. But Dick was, I used to say that he had forgotten more football than we'd ever learn, and was just an incredible guy. And we talked up until he passed not too long ago. But all these guys, they make such an indelible mark upon you. And I still remember Roland Acosta telling me early in my coaching career how the term coach, how important it is, and how you're one of the 5 most important people in somebody's life later on in life, and it's more about it's more important than just X's and O's, and certainly it cements in your mind the lessons that you can teach, positive or negatively in some cases, unfortunately, as a coach, that you need to keep in mind when you're doing that, the honor that you have to be a coach.
The name Roland Acosta, it stands out in my mind because I was blessed to have the opportunity to coach with him at Plant High School. John Burgess was the athletic director and the head football coach. So Roland and I were assistants over there, and we enjoyed each other well. And he did a little side hustle, bird dogging for a real estate thing, so I got my house during the time through Roland Acosta. But he finally got to be head football coach at Plant. I was glad to know about that, and he was very fortunate to be successful
Sure.
during those times. And I know that you had a great success in your coaching career. So before we get to that, after you left high school, which college did you attend?
Well, I graduated from Princeton University in New Jersey. I was very blessed and was the first in my family to graduate from college. I'd had a nice career. Had made an All-American team and what have you. Was recruited to Florida, Mississippi State, a bunch of different big schools. And Princeton really wasn't on my radar. I really didn't know that much about the Ivy League, and it really wasn't heard of back then for kids to go to the Ivy League from here. And I visited. It's kind of a different process with the Ivy League in that you couldn't visit back then until after you'd been accepted. So I had already signed a scholarship with Mississippi State. Florida was going on probation. They had done some problems. And I remember going and visiting and just being incredibly impressed with the opportunity to go to arguably the #1 academic school, if not in America, maybe one of the best in the world. And so it just was fascinating, and that I'd have that opportunity. So I had to go back and tell Mississippi State, rescind my scholarship. They weren't real happy about that. I remember my dad meeting me at the airport, and he said, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, after I did my visit to Princeton, I said 11. And he said, oh boy, but I was able to play football and play at a pretty high level. And what people don't realize is Princeton and Rutgers played the first intercollegiate football game. So football goes way back there. But at the same time, I may not have played big-time Division I, but I certainly played big-time Division I academics. And so it was a great opportunity for me. But I always wanted to go away to college, experience something new and different. I mean, Michelle Obama was Michelle Robinson back then. She was a year ahead of me in class. There were all kinds of folks there that were, from places that I had never even thought about. But I always wanted to come back to Tampa and give something back to this community and to the people and institutions that have given so much to me.
You did just that, and we're going to be talking about it as we go along. Now, Princeton, you had to be a very good academic scholar or student to get a scholarship to Princeton. Did that scholarship require a certain grade average, or?
It did. You had to keep your, I don't remember the exact amount, but it's different there. It's not a football scholarship per se, although they do set aside, I guess, a certain amount of money that goes towards that. Academic scholarships that go towards athletics. But it did require a certain that you had to keep your grades at a certain level, and obviously, the way you behaved and those kinds of things. But I didn't have to play football. That was one of the things that really attracted me. If I had decided a year in that I didn't want to play football anymore, I could have still, and some people did that. And so it made it more pure in a certain way, because that's what it's about. It's about academics and getting your studies and those opportunities, taking advantage of those opportunities and not just the sports. So it really kept things in perspective for me.
Now, leaving high school, you had to leave a lot of players and go different directions. I know when I left high school, you just wished the entire team could go with you or you go with them, but that's when you start branching away from each other. And decisions were hard to make because Joe Blow may have been going over here and Tom Jones might have been going this direction, and you didn't have a scholarship here, but maybe you had one there. So how tough was that then for you to leave your teammates?
Well, it was a little bit different in that we were competitive my senior year, but we didn't have the way it is now where you may have 4, 5, 6 players, Division I players all going somewhere the same year. Yeah. But we had a few that went on in different places. I was fortunate that probably the best player on the team, along with myself, we ended up both going to Princeton. That was Mark Dexter. He was a receiver, and we ended up being roommates. Wow. So it allowed us, and his father drove a bus for Greyhound. My father was a painting contractor, a house painter. So we came from very humble beginnings, the two of us. His father ended up working for the building department for years. But I think it allowed us to make the transition to college very well. So I didn't have to necessarily leave Tampa behind. I had a good part of it with me.
Having a good roommate up there kept you from being homesick. We didn't talk about the position you played or what team you were awarded the scholarship. Talk about that.
Well, I played offensive and defensive line. I was offered scholarships different places to play different things. Vanderbilt, Duke wanted me to play defense. Florida, I think, wanted me to play defense. I ended up playing offensive line at Princeton. In retrospect, I wish I had played defensive line. I loved playing defense, but played on both sides of the ball. But I ended up playing offensive guard. I played tackle and guard in high school, but I played primarily guard, offensive guard in college. Then when I played a little bit of semi-pro football, and actually I tried out for the Bandits before they folded, and unfortunately the league went away. But I probably would have played interior line there as well, guard.
Put on your thinking cap now and look back to the college football playing days and bring out the name of the coach. Who's the head football coach at that time? Can you go back that far?
Yeah, well, our senior year, we had two of them, but Ron Rogerson was my coach my senior year at Princeton. And Ron was there just the 1 year, and he had coached for Tubby Raymond at Maine, and came down and ran the wing T. And we had a quarterback who was one of the best players in the country, ended up playing with the New York Giants for a while. So we had to make quite a transition to play the wing T. I had to lose a bunch of weight because we pulled, all the time.
Can you remember this quarterback name?
Doug Butler.
Okay.
Doug Butler. He was a backup and a great player. But Ron, more than just the X's and O's of it, he was an incredible character, and probably had as much to do with not only my love for the game, love for coaching. He just had a zest for life. Unfortunately, we talked about it. We had a reunion recently, and the next year he passed away. And the outpouring of love, we talked for 2 hours about Ron Rogerson. We only had him in 1 year, but he made such an impression on all of our lives that he was really something else.
Now let's get into the coaching aspect. What possessed you to want to coach football? How did you get started in coaching?
I'll be honest, my first experience coaching my senior year in high school, there's a new head coach that came in the spring. Coach Forrest retired. Gosh, I can't try to think of his name right now.
That's okay.
But he came in, and he didn't have a full staff together because he came in the spring. They didn't give the job to Earl Lane, which they probably should have. And so he had trouble, and he was going to coach the offensive line himself, but he needed help. So he asked me if I wanted to come out and help a little bit during the spring. And I really took to it. I loved working with the guys and that. So I think it was kind of cemented in my mind that and I'd always, after practices and things, I'd always get with guys and we'd work extra and that kind of stuff. So it's all about teaching and giving back. When I came back from school, I just sort of volunteered to coach track with Nick DiMaggio, and then ended up volunteering. I was already starting my career and working, but I started working with David Lewis was the head coach at Tampa Catholic at the time, and that's how I got started.
Nick DiMaggio, what a great guy. Now, you coached at Tampa Catholic for several years.
Yeah, 17 as a head coach.
Yes, and after a while you left and went to Jefferson High School. What's his name?
Mike Simmons was the head coach then.
Yes, but what's the other guy name that you took on? He was the coach.
Mike Fenton?
Fenton, that's it.
Yeah.
Mike Fenton, he was there with you.
Right.
And after you stayed there for a little while, you went back to your alma mater, Tampa Catholic.
Yeah.
We got about 3 minutes to go through some of this, and we
Okay.
want to get Batman and David Lewis in there.
Yeah, I called David when I had a chance to go back to Tampa Catholic, and Mike, had the one more year at Jefferson, a couple of years, and he won a state championship, and then he was leaving there, so I said, Mike, let's get the band back together. I remember calling David, and TC unfortunately had gone through some rough years, the years that we had left, and I said, David, let's try to put this thing back together. Fortunately, he came out the first spring and looked at us and said, are you sure about this? And then we were able to get things going, and he's still there. Basically, my whole staff is still there. I still get by there, and I miss it. I miss the guys. I miss the players and the camaraderie very much. But I'm happy for their success, and love going out and see David and Batman, to see what those guys, the way that they are with those kids and what they give back, what they've accomplished in their lives, and willing to still be out there coaching is remarkable.
He always wanted to be with Fenton, and he wanted to be with you, and you guys finally came over to Tampa Catholic and worked together.
Right. Oh yeah. We're like brothers, and we talk all the time still. He still likes to throw the football too much, but that's just me, But no, I'm just kidding. But we used to call it our mojo. When we called plays together, we used to get in the zone, and we did some damage over the years.
Before we get into the political aspect, What would you say to parents and our students as advice, good advice for their future endeavors?
Well, the first thing I would do for parents is let the players play, let the coaches coach. Give the coaches some. You have to, for the players to believe in their coaches and to believe in the process. The parents have got to believe in the coaches and the process because they model what the parents do. And so give some authority figures some leeway. These days, they're too often to blame the coaches for different things. The players, I say, just play, enjoy yourself. Don't think about, don't get all caught up in what's going to happen in 4 years or 3 years, or you're going to this school or that school. And then play as many sports as you want. Cross over. You know, this idea of specializing and everybody saying, well, I'm going to be the major league pitcher, so I'm not going to play this, or I'm going to, you know, you've got a Kevin Knox that just came out of Tampa Catholic. It makes sense, okay? He's at Kentucky.
Wow.
1 year, he may be, you know, one and done there. Okay, but the truth is, for one of those, there's an awful lot of, you know, Jimmys and Joes that are just going to, they just need to explore and explain. I mean, and enjoy their time in high school. So if you can play, I was talking to Kenny Kelly the other day. You know, here's a guy that played 4 sports, 1 state title and 3. You know, he would come over in his baseball uniform, long jump, and go right back and get in the outfield and play baseball at Tampa
That's
Catholic.
what this is.
So play all the sports, enjoy yourself, and the winning and enjoy the process. Don't get caught up all this transfer stuff and going here and there and worrying parents playing each other against other, you know, this school against that school, and it's crazy. I think that's the part that you know. I think if I could give some advice.
When you're saying playing more than one sport, Rick Casares was all-around sports guy, football, basketball, track and field, and all.
Right.
They said he had just ran a touchdown, and as he was coming off the field, they sent him over to the baseball diamond, and he went over there and hit a home run and come back. I said, wow, what a great day.
Absolutely.
You were so successful in beating most of all of your opponents in the political world for different positions. We got about a minute or two for you to say something about that.
Well, I've been blessed. You know, it's the other. Once upon a time, I spoke to Derek Brooks because they were trying to get Derek to run for office once upon a time, and I talked to him and I said, well, I want to talk to you about the other contact sport I know something about. And so, you know, politics can be rough and tumble, but in some ways, a political campaign is very much like a you know, a football game plan. It's in carrying out. You know, you have to kind of know your strengths and weaknesses, know your opponent's strengths and weaknesses, come up with a plan and execute it. And I've been fortunate that people have given me the opportunity to serve them, and I look forward to doing that, continue to do that in the future. Luckily, I haven't run up against any candidate named Jesuit yet because I can't seem to beat those guys very much. But no, I'm very, very blessed.
How did you tell the guys you were leaving coaching and going into political thing? You got about 30 seconds.
Yeah, that was one of the toughest days of my life. You know, I'd always been able to balance both. When I was in legislature, it was a part-time job, so I was able to coach and serve. But in this case, this job, and plus the fact that now I have small kids at home, it just was time. It was time for me to step aside. I didn't want to do something that I wasn't going to be able to do justice to the kids or the program. And so it was tough. It's tough to look people in the eye and say that you're leaving, but you know, they understood, and you know, it was the right time for me to step aside. You know, someday, you know, God willing, I'll be back. I told somebody I'll be an assistant kicking coach. Nobody can get mad at me for that.
Well, I hope you find time to go out and see Tampa Catholic in some of their sports events. You've been so successful there, and I know when you go, they say the legend is coming back because you are a legend in this town, and especially at Tampa Catholic. So we certainly hope that you will continue to find love and enjoyment in this position as you felt in coaching.
Oh, I coach a great team now at the Property Appraiser's office.
So that's it for our Tampa Bay Community Network Sports Talk. We certainly hope you've enjoyed this show as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to you. So be with us again on our next show right here on the Tampa Bay Community Network Sports Talk.